Hey guys, so today's video is a little bit different than the videos of the past. This will be a new set where the focus is just reviewing content, right? And so there won't be much expounding upon the ideas or the meanings of these things. It's literally just going to be, this is what these things are, right? Just a quick refresher to help get them activated in your brain for these days leading up to the exam. So I'm going to be using our curriculum objectives as a guide and hitting the main talking points of each unit as I go along. So this particular video is about our first ecology unit, and it's going to get into it. All right. So the first topic at hand is to define and sequence the levels of ecological organization from biosphere to species. And now I don't like species as being the first level because species is a very large idea. It's all of the organisms within a species, right? That can cover the whole planet. So what I'm stating it as is organism. Okay? And that's just an individual instance of a particular thing. So I am an organism. Right? The next level up is population. And so a population is a full group of these same organisms in a place. Right? And so there's a population of humans within Lynn English High School. A community is the next level up, and that is all of the different populations within a place. So within Lynn English High School, there's a community of different living things. So the humans within the building, the flies that get in through the windows, the little microbes that are crawling all over everything, the spiders and the mice, all of the living things within this building are part of the community of Lynn English High School. The next level on up is ecosystems. Okay? And so there's an ecosystem within English High School, and that's all of the living things that were part of the community, plus all of the abiotic, non-living factors that contribute to the things that are going on in this building. Right? So things like oxygen levels, availability of water, things like that. Okay, that's all of that stuff together is the ecosystem of Lynn English High School. Right. And then we got biomes, and biomes are a big idea. It's when you put more than one ecosystem together, right? And so we have a biome of Lynn English High School plus the front lawn, right? Those are two different ecosystems, but they work together, right? So the front lawn of Lynn English High School, that ecosystem plus the ecosystem of LEHS together, that's a biome. I can even throw in Flax Pond as part of the biome, right? So all three of those ecosystems intermingling is a biome. So they do have an impact on one another. They are close enough to impact the way that they run. Right? So you can have like a forest next to an ocean. And because they're together, it creates a different biome than if you have a forest next to a desert. Yeah. And then finally, the biggest level of organization here in ecology is the biosphere. And that is all of the ecosystems together on the earth, right? And sometimes it's used to refer to all of the living things on earth. Okay. But yeah, everything all at once. So those are our levels of ecology. So moving on to our next standard here, we are to differentiate between biotic and abiotic factors and provide examples of each. So biotic factors are living things in the ecosystem. Okay? So that is all of the organisms in that ecosystem. Okay? It's also the dead organisms. So it doesn't have to be alive still to be a biotic factor. If it was once alive, it's still a biotic factor. It also includes the things produced by living organisms. So things like sugar, right, are considered biotic factors because they're only made by living things. Okay. Once that dead thing breaks back down into its base components, like nitrogen and phosphorus, okay, it is no longer biotic. Okay. It's lost that organization of life. But as long as it's still organized in a livity way, it's a biotic factor. Abiotic are just the non-living things within the ecosystem. Okay? And so that's things like temperature, precipitation, rain, snow, fog. Okay? Gas levels, the concentration of oxygen in an environment, for instance, or the concentration of carbon dioxide, okay? And the levels of sunlight. Right? Sunlight's a very important abiotic factor. Okay? And so that's the difference between biotic and abiotic. Biotic is living things, abiotic is non-living things. So the next standard point that I'd like to talk about is identifying and explaining the different types of ecological relationships. Okay? And now specifically, these are interspecies interactions. Okay? Interactions between two different species. So we have predation. We have a predator and we have prey. The predator eats the prey, a wolf and a bunny. Okay? Predation. We have parasitism, and that is any relationship where one party benefits to the detriment of the other party. Right? The other party is harmed by this relationship. So things like fleas or mosquitoes or tapeworms. Okay? All of those things are the parasites. Okay? And so they live one way or another by harming their host. Right? And so, for instance, mosquitoes, they suck our blood. So they are parasitic, okay? They suck our blood, they are the parasite, we are the host. Okay? Then we have commensalism. That's where one party in the relationship benefits and the other party is completely neutral. It doesn't hurt them, it doesn't help them, they're just chilling. Okay? And so there are certain fish that swim behind sharks. And the sharks have their meal, they eat up the food, the scraps fall behind, and the little fish eat the scraps. Right? And so the little fish benefit, they get food from this relationship, but the shark don't care. It doesn't help the shark that they're around, but it certainly doesn't hurt the shark either. Commensalism. Mutualism is where both parties benefit. Okay? So an example of mutualism is bees and flowers. Okay? The bees get the nectar from the flowers in order to make honey, and the flowers get pollinated by the traveling of the bees so that they can make baby flowers. Okay? Both parties benefit. It's mutualism. And finally, there is competition, and that's when two different species want the same resource, and there is a limited amount of that resource, and so they have to compete for it. Okay? Competition. So most of these are examples of symbiotic relationships, right? They're organisms working together either beneficially or detrimentally. Okay? But competition is not a type of symbiosis. It's just competition. Predation is not symbiosis either. Cool? All right. So our next bullet point is explain the importance of a keystone species on maintaining the health of an ecosystem. And so first, obviously, we must define what a keystone species is. And a keystone species is just a super important population within an ecosystem. Disproportionately important. Okay? Pretty much the most important species or population within that particular ecosystem. And so if something were to happen to this population, there would be a chain reaction that would just cascade into the destruction of pretty much the entire ecosystem. And so pretend that there's a type of grass in an ecosystem that all the primary producers eat. Nom, 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 nom. So all the bunnies, all the ladybugs, everybody that's a primary consumer is eating the grass, right? Did I say primary producer before? I think I might have. I meant primary consumer. If I said the wrong thing, you know what I meant. Okay? So the primary consumers are all eating this particular grass. If this grass were to die off, pretend a grass virus comes, right? And the grass virus kills all the grass. Now there's no producers left in this ecosystem, and the bunnies are going to die, and the ladybugs are going to die, and everybody that eats the bunnies and everybody that eats the ladybugs is going to die, and the whole ecosystem is just going to fall apart. Okay? So that's what a keystone species is. It's one population that is super important to that particular ecosystem. Next bullet point, use examples to justify that ecosystems with greater biodiversity tend to have greater resilience and resistance to change. So first we must consider what biodiversity is, and that's simply having different types of organisms at each heterotrophic level in the ecosystem. And so the more different types of organisms that you have in an ecosystem, the more resilient that ecosystem is going to be. The more versatile that ecosystem is going to be. So if we turn back to my storyline about Keystone Species and that grass, right? If that grass was the only producer in that ecosystem, that was not a diverse ecosystem. If I had a bunch of different producers, so I had some grass, I had some dandelions, I had some tomato plants, I had some bushes, I had some banana trees, right? And my primary consumers could eat each of them. When that grass virus came, it would have been fine because the consumers would have just ate other plants, right? And so by increasing the biodiversity, we increase the resilience of an ecosystem because individual instances of disaster or detriment to one species won't have that same cascading effect. Right? So biodiversity is good for increasing the resilience of an ecosystem. Next bullet point says interpret a graph to identify the carrying capacity of a population. So once again, we have to start by defining the term. We're looking at carrying capacity, and that is the population size that an ecosystem can support. And so if an ecosystem can hold 50 wolves, the carrying capacity for wolves is 50 wolves. All right, pretty straightforward. And when we're looking at the graph, right, we are looking at the population number on my y-axis. My x-axis has time passed, and I've marked off 50 as my value. So we see a growth of this population over time, steady, 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 exponential, and then eventually it levels off, and you get this kind of squiggly line. Okay? And so my 50 is this kind of median point here. And so when I reach my carrying capacity, I can go a little bit over carrying capacity, and then things start dying because there's not enough resources, so it dips back down. Now there's enough resources so things can reproduce again, goes back up, things start dying again, oh no, goes back down, goes back up, goes back down, goes back up, and it kind of steadies off right around this 50 mark. Okay? So you'll see this continuous, and that's how you know you've reached carrying capacity. You see this on the graph. Okay? Next bullet point, calculate changes in population size considering birth and death rate, immigration and immigration. Right. So we're just calculating the change in a population size. Right? So maybe I start with 50 banana trees, and by 2042, I have 53 banana trees. My population grew by 3 banana trees. That's a change in population size. Right? And so basically there's 4 factors that go into the change in the population size. Okay? Things can be born, that increases your population. Things can die, that decreases your population. Things can move in, that increases your population, and things can move out, that decreases your population. Yeah? And so if you take these two, which are obviously related, right? Birth is the positive, death is the negative. Okay? You find the difference between them. Okay, so you take birth and you subtract deaths. That gives you a value. Okay? And you sum it with immigration minus emigration. Okay? So you take this value and you plus it with this value. That will give you the net change. Then this can be positive or negative. Right? And so if there's more things dying and emigrating than there are being born and immigrating, your population will go down. Right? So if I had 400,000 things leave, I had 2 things come, I had 7 things born and 2 things dead, right? My population is going to go down because I had a lot of things leave. Right? But yeah, that's how you calculate the population change. Birth minus death plus immigration minus emigration. And the last bullet point I want to talk about for this unit, I've actually combined these 2 bullet points here. And I say identify and analyze direct and indirect ways that humans impact biodiversity and ecosystems, including habitat fragmentation, climate change, pollution, invasive species, and overharvesting, with identify examples and evaluate the impact of various solutions to environmental problems, such as captive breeding, habitat restoration, pollution mitigation, energy conservation, and ecotourism on the biodiversity of the ecosystem. Right? And so basically we have a list of the problems that humans cause and the solutions that we have for those problems. All right. So over here, that's how I've compiled them. Let me zoom out a bit. All right. So we got our problem side and our solution side. So if our problem is habitat fragmentation, which is when humans do something to take one big, beautiful habitat and split it into little pieces. And so this could be something as straightforward as building a highway in between a habitat. Right? So if I had one big habitat, I'd build a highway between it, and now I've separated it into 2 smaller habitats. Right? And so the resource distribution is now different than it was originally. Right? So my populations are going to be really all upset and thrown off, right? Because they don't have access to the right resources anymore. The solution to this is habitat restoration. We fix the habitat that we broke. And now some of these solutions are really easy, right? So in this instance, I took my highway and I separated it into small habitats, right? What we can do is build a bridge over the highway that the organisms can cross, or we can build tunnels under the highway that organisms can cross. And so that way the organisms can get to either side of the highway and they have access to the resources still. Ta-da! Resources, restoration, habitat, beautiful, problem solved. Yeah? And so anytime we're fixing the habitat, that's habitat restoration. Now some habitat restoration is far more complex because maybe we ruin the ecosystem way more than that. Right? So the worse we ruin it, the harder it is to fix. So like coral reefs, like we are trying to rebuild coral reefs with different kinds of strategies. Right? So yeah. Next problem, climate change. Right? And so this is driven primarily by CO2 production, right? Creating the greenhouse effect, global warming, and its inverse is the extreme weather points, right? So we used to call it global warming because the average temperature of the Earth is going up, but it also results in more extreme versions of other weather. So like in the winter, now it's colder, right? During hurricane season, we have more hurricanes because when you mess up the energy levels on the Earth, it's going to change all of our weather systems. So climate overall is changing. Sea levels are on the rise, yada, yada, yada. Big problem, huge problem. Like, you know, global catastrophe problem could be the end of everything type of problem. And the number one solution to this is simple energy conservation, right? Find cleaner ways to make our energy. Windmills instead of coal. Right? Windmills don't produce any CO2. Before we move on to a more advanced, futuristic, proper infrastructure, right? Before we have the windmills built, before we have the solar power, before we have the hydrogen-powered cars that we should have. Right now, we can do things like not running our lights as much. Right? Turn your lights off when you leave your bedroom. Because making the electricity to power your lights right now is typically done through processes that are burning fossil fuels. And so that's creating carbon dioxide. Right? Don't be buying up cryptocurrency because the cryptocurrency processes require a lot of energy, believe it or not. So all those stupid Bitcoins are ruining the planet. Gonna kill us all because of stupid cryptocurrencies. Get out of here with your cryptocurrencies. All right. So yeah, that's our solution. Then we have pollution, which is just straight up pollution. You know what pollution is. I'm not going to describe it. And the solution to pollution is pollution mitigation, right? So if your problem is dumping bad stuff into the ocean, make the stuff not bad before you dump it into the ocean. That's it. Right? Then we have overharvesting, right? And so overharvesting doesn't have to be of plants. It can be of any particular factor for the ecosystem, biotic or abiotic. So I can overharvest salmon, right? So if I overharvest salmon from the ocean, I'm down salmon, I don't have enough salmon, Easy solution to that is just make a lot more salmon, right? So captive breeding. We make a bunch of salmon, have a bunch of babies, and we put the salmons back in the ocean. Problem solved. Right? So yeah, that was it. That was Ecology Unit 1. Review session over. Ta-da! Bye!